Hello.
Hi guys, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
John will be joining us in a second.
Nice. How you doing?
Good, good.
Just thinking I haven't been on this call for months and months and months.
Yes, no, we've changed it a little bit. We've switched around the dates and yeah, all that. So
Well, Thursdays when I play golf, so it's either listen to you guys or play golf, and you know what? It's got the priority.
What's it going to be?
Hey, if it was up to me, I'd be playing golf too. It's real funny because I played it quite a bit when I was young, like at school, and then didn't play it for ages, and then played it quite a bit when we lived in Ireland because there's heaps of golf courses in Ireland, and then have come back and literally haven't played since I've lived in this country for the last 5 years. So one of those funny things that you kind of go through stages in life, don't you, where it's something that you have time for and then don't have time for and then have time for again. So.
It's not a game when you're a parent. Uses too much time. But when the kids get to 15 and 16, they go, "Do you want to spend some time with me, Dad?" You ask them, "Do you want to spend some time with me on a Sunday afternoon?" And they go, "No." So you just go, "Well, I'm going to golf then." Yeah.
Except this is Thursday afternoons, Mark. You're telling me about, not Sunday afternoons. So.
Well, with 15 and 16-year-olds, it gets a time when they just don't want to be with parents on the weekend, and your wife doesn't want to be with your husband for both days of the weekend, so golf becomes the only option.
You must be living in a drier part of the country, Mark.
Oh, no, I haven't played golf for 2 weeks because it's been too wet. That's the problem.
Yeah. Where are you?
Very good.
I'm in Auckland. They lost eight pine trees on Friday night, so course is still closed. Yeah.
I hear is it raining again? Is that right?
Evening it's meant. Yeah. Well, it hasn't stopped raining for weeks, but it's raining more tonight. Yeah.
It's terrible news. And it looks like a bunch of people have been, have lost their houses and things as well. So, yeah. At this point, I'm glad I live in Wellington. Although, as obviously the Mayor of Auckland says, watch out, Wellington, coming for you when there's an earthquake.
I'll tell you so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
we won't talk about the politics of Auckland, but maybe we can kind of start with how people's holidays were. Has everyone kind of come back and feeling refreshed? I've been back since literally the second week of January, so I feel like I'm like neck deep again already and trying to get stuff done. So, no, is anyone else kind of that busy or?
What I found at the HiNZ conference that everybody was just totally out of it. They had no energy, no enthusiasm, no nothing. We're just hanging out for those last 2 weeks before they went on holiday.
One of those things about I wonder if it was too close to Christmas. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like I wonder if, because it was normally a couple of weeks earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it's funny how much that made a difference. Maybe it kept us going through to Christmas before. Do you know what I mean? Like we're just on the downward slope and it kind of just pushed you along, whereas people might have kind of dipped down coming into it. Has everyone seen Peter the Plumber? So there was a Peter that works with us. He couldn't be there, so did a presentation, which is largely about kind of his experience working in Te Whatu Water to date. So I don't know if people have seen that. I can probably post a link in the chat. But yeah, it's a kind of a salient note, I would say, of his experience since he started. So he's been around about 12 months. But yeah, and it's funny because it's a little bit of, I would say his experience isn't unique in the health system, even just putting aside a Māori context. We seem to battle a lot in terms of the urgent versus the important. Do you know what I mean? Like so much time goes on the urgent stuff. So yeah, certainly is an issue for him. But yeah, no, I see it more broadly as well. Have we got any news? Has anyone been watching the internet about what's happening? It seems like ChatGPT's blown up. So I've seen a few chats of few conversations about that. Have people seen that? So ChatGPT, and Greg shaking your head. You'll know exactly what ChatGPT is. It's that chatbot, the one that's the giant corpus of content off the internet that basically has been distilled into a chatbot as a giant AI. Come from OpenAI, and now Microsoft wants to build it into the back of Microsoft Office and return us to Clippy from the early 2000s, but actually maybe a smarter version. So it might actually be helpful rather than unhelpful. I've seen a bunch of people using it to create content, and then a bunch of people saying how incorrect the content is. So I made some content for our website, which was basically tell me about the ehealth forum. So explain what the ehealth forum is, and then explain what HiNZ is. And so it made me a bunch of content for that. So I was like, hey, people at HiNZ and Nathan Kershaw, tell me how happy you are with this, and we'll put that up on our website. So I haven't had any feedback that it's wrong yet, so seems okay.
Oh, well,
yes.
I was going to say you did steal my story for my story of the week, which was about ChatGPT. So I might as well continue on to that. It was that it's been ChatGPT has passed the US medical licensing exams without cramming, unlike students. So that's positive. I'll post the link into the chat. But yeah, pretty much it raised the question about whether the AI chatbot could be used in a positive way to one day help write the exam, or maybe in a not so positive to help students prepare for it, or I'd say possibly pass it. So they've actually thrown a paper into medRx with the results of how their thing went.
Is that how you say that?
I don't know. I just said it on the fly just then. So
I'm assuming you're going to post a link about
yes.
about it. So you know how there's the website ARIVX or XV or something?
RXIV mixers, yeah.
Isn't there that weird thing that there's things on the internet that you've only ever seen written down, but you've never actually heard anyone say it, and then someone says it and you're like, that's how you're supposed to say it?
Like Hermione on Harry Potter, when you read it, you have no idea how to pronounce it. So when it's actually
I've never seen that name before in my life. And so is it Hermione? Hermione? Yeah.
We were playing around with ChatGPT quite a lot, and especially sort of playing around with its ethical limitations. And a friend of mine came up with a prompt for it, which I'll put in the chat, that can really mess with its head. And basically, you play with its ability to role play with itself, and you can take it beyond the normal constraints of what it can do or it's allowed to do. So if you want some fun to play with, just put that prompt into ChatGPT, and it's got specific commands for making it disobey its rule system.
Yeah. Nice. I like it. Good work, Cameron.
Yeah.
Did you see? I think
Test
I posted
the system,
on
break the system.
Yeah. Well, you know what they say. Make a bit of mousetrap, they make a bit of mouth. Did you see? I posted about there was a online mental health service in the US that was testing ChatGPT responses. So they were reviewed by a person before they posted them, but they were basically running a study, a research study without any ethics. I think you commented on that, Greg. That was all ChatGPT generating the content.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was horrendous. that was the unfortunate experiment Mark II. To save myself typing this, can I also point out that med exams are by far the simplest exams at university. They're just regurgitation exercises. It's that ability to, can you remember 10 million data points rather than can you think? It's just, can you regurgitate?
Yeah.
So the fact that a ChatGPT, any AI tool with deductive logic can answer a regurgitation exam is hardly exciting.
The interesting thing for me is that the real value in it is in that kind of testing of clinical competences in that clinical reasoning question. So here's a clinical reasoning in the sense that here's a bunch of facts and here's some experience that you have, and you need to figure out, is my treatment plan the right one, and then is it working? That seems to me to be much more.
Yeah, that's a much more interesting question, but then you're starting to shift from deductive reasoning into inductive reasoning or abductive reasoning, and then that gets even more exciting. And then the whole AI construct that we're familiar using with breaks down and dies a horrible and painful death.
Yep. Yeah, indeed.
As far as I could see, my main use of it immediately popped to mind was writing board reports and reports for execs. It's just, you know, 100%. Write fluff on the world is still flat. 3 paragraphs. Perfection. Nice. Then all I need is a similar tool to do graphics at the level of a 3-year-old, and I can generate automated board reports and invest no more time in the damn things. So.
Yeah, indeed. So it's a good starter for 10. I kind of think there's lots of change management-y, comms-y things that start to become a lot easier for you. You know how comms asks you to write hey, we've been doing this project, and you know we need to tell everybody about it. Write it in a style which is, you know, easy to consume type thing. One of the other thoughts we've got is you could use it to make iterative content. So if you've got like core content around for example, cardiovascular disease. So create some content, something like create some content that would help a consumer with a reading age of X understand cardiovascular disease, and then change the age, change the gender of the person, change the, do you know what I mean? So you could change all the tone or the style of writing, and so you could iteratively generate more personalized content off the basis of that core information. You'd have to know the core information was right though to start with, because you know if it was wrong to start with, then of course everything else, the consequence is going to be wrong, I guess. So
to be absolutely boring, of course, that implies that we would have a monocultural view of health.
Interesting thought. Yeah. You mean as a core set of facts?
Yes, a fact is only a fact worth relative to the culture from where it was derived.
Yep.
So yeah.
Interesting question, because at some point it derives to mathematics and physics, I guess.
Okay, so playing naughtily and then let everybody else actually have a turn. Which physics? Because there's more than one.
I'm kind of curious around this as well, in the space of where like cultures come together in that science space, and looking at Roronga approaches to health, and sort of, I guess I was looking at like tinctures and herbal medicines and where that intersects with science, whether they do meet at one point that is like mutually agreeable or not, or whether there's always going to be like an interpretation to the reality. But yeah, it's curious for me to look to find those points where cultures meet and agree with each other, because I guess there's an element of human experience which hopefully can be agreed on, or like
does it need to be?
It's good to innovate around. Yeah, I guess the question for me is like innovating around our experience, like whether you need to sort of have some sort of common agreement around the types of experiences you're innovating around, and whether they're shared in some way. I guess it's particularly relevant to that space of working in mental health. Like,
I think, can anyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. I guess the outcome is probably going to be agreed upon, but the pathways to get there can be different.
Yeah, and I think my question within there is like, are there going to be different effectivenesses within different pathways that get to the same results, and how would that affect people's choice?
Yeah,
I guess like
I think that definitely is. Yeah.
The easy ones are the transactional ones. These imply the laws of physics, the fundamental laws of physics and the determinants of the universe as such. So those ones we probably can come up with a common understanding of it, although the flat earthers would disagree with us. Where we end up with problems is the transformational, because that implies that there's no neurodiversity in the world, and that cultural perceptions of what is a successful outcome are non-existent across the world, which is just bollocks.
I think there's plenty of evidence to say the same service works differently for different people or produces different outcomes. So we know this in studies. So we study populations because studying individuals is difficult. And so there's always a heterogeneity of outcome. So presumably that means everybody needs a different pathway to get to the same outcome.
I'm still stuck on same outcome. I do not see that, that we're all desperately hunting for the same outcome, that our worldview, our perception of the sort of ontology and epistemology of our perceived experience is not going to be the same depending on our base culture or on our neurodiversity.
Do you reckon survival is like a universal outcome?
Survival might be a universal outcome, but that also implies that you're all facing the same threat.
Yeah, or you believe non-survival is a threat.
Yeah, but I mean, I mean, I went and did, one of my interests is photography, and I could never understand how people in India, people in America took some amazing photos and got this stunning lighting, until I went there and discovered that actually the sun was different there. And there you go. That's how they did it. They just walked out their door and took a photo. Never crossed my mind.
It's interesting, Greg, because I would say the same thing about lots of places in Europe. Like you go to Italy or you go to Spain, and the sun seems definitely different, or the color of life seems very different to how it does down here. I feel like the light feels much bluer in New Zealand than it does in places like Italy or Spain. I wonder if that affects the flavor of things like tomatoes. And because I felt like when you go to, like, I don't know if people have been to Italy, but when I went to Italy, I felt like the food, like the same food you would eat here, like tomatoes, tasted different. And presumably there's a bit of process in that, but at the same time, it kind of felt like the qualitative difference was the way the sun shone. And isn't that a weird thing? I don't know. Maybe it's not a weird thing. Maybe everyone else experienced exactly the same thing as me.
So quite clearly the answer is no, we don't, because one of my recent discoveries is that I've actually got a mild visual agnosia. So I can't actually resolve these wonderful new AI images. And they go, oh, this is this amazing deep fakes. And to me, it looks like you've got two zombies and stuck them in a car crusher. And so the bits move independently. I can't resolve them into a single image. So no, we can both look at the same image, and there's a pretty average chance that I won't see the same thing as you. So no, we can both look at the same scene and not see the same object. My favorite for philosophy of mind is the dreaded tomato and the people who are red colorblind. They literally have no red receptors. They cannot see a red tomato. But they will still, when you ask them, they'll go, yeah, that's a red tomato. No way they can see that. They're not seeing the red tomato like I'm seeing a red tomato.
Socially conditioned to know that every tomato is red.
Socially taught. You've learned it.
Has anyone seen
you
any
can't
other news?
echolocate color, can you?
Oh, good question. Don't know.
Subtle your echolocation devices.
You can't ecolate. There's a paper by Thomas Nagel on being a bat, which is very worth a read. Goes on a bit, but it's well worth a read looking at some of this stuff. But no, you can't echolocate a color.
Could you, is there some way that the frequency of light could be interpreted into a sound?
I just remember, sorry, I just remembered a TED talk. I can't remember it, like all the details, but the guy was a cyborg, and so I think, was he blind or was he just colorblind?
Oh, he was doing
But
the
he had-
whoa thing.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
drifting off his
yeah.
head.
Yeah,
Doesn't Stevie Wonder see color, see sound as color? It's just you're
yes,
just
so that
you're
happens.
jogging my memory.
That-
But
yeah, that
that's a
happens with
secondary
people.
cognitive processing thing, not
Yes, it
a
is.
primary,
When you lose
not a
a, yeah,
not a
when you
primary
lose a
sensory
sense.
experience.
Can I test a definition of health to see what you think it could be have merit? As like I was trying to define health the other day as perpetuating experiences that keep us alive and resolving experiences that take us closer to death. As a sort of dynamic space of there's no time component to that, but it was just to sort of to try and explore what health could look like in a non sort of cultural lens, but it's sort of implicated by what you were saying before around.
It's an interesting thing because I would then apply it in the context of something like the therapeutic products bill. So ostensibly, the therapeutic products bill is about how we regulate medicines. Let's start really generically, medicines and medical devices. But the question being is, what is a medicine? And does that include food? Probably. Because what is a medicine other than something to keep you alive or live in a better sense? And then medical devices, where it could be an iPhone, it could be a keyboard, it could be an implantable pacemaker, it could be a drug-eluting stent. And you can kind of start to see the interesting thing around the therapeutic products bill, which is out for consultation. So give some feedback. But it could be everything and nothing, and so it kind of comes down to what's the regulation that's going to come with this. And one of the questions I've got is, how do you manage such a diversity of potential things under therapeutic products with a country our size? So, MedSafe is currently only 80 people. CGA in Australia is about 1,500. So you can see there's a delta there already. And then if you think about, the FDA, who might be argued to be the gold standard, I think they employ something like 30,000 people, something like that. And so if you want to do an FDA type process, you're at 30,000 people and at 100 grand a year, what's that, 300 million a year, something like that ish, just to run your regulation. More than that, I think, might be 3 billion a year to run your regulation of medical products. But might regulate lots of things. And then you've kind of got what's the benefit. So, on the other side, which is, let's just have another 80 people and we'll rely on the FDA and TGA to regulate things. And then you have this question of, does that mean anything that's specifically designed for New Zealand will never be regulated? Or does it need to be regulated? So it's an interesting kind of thing. And if you think about genomic therapies or genetic therapies, for example, no one else in the world is going to create genetic therapies for Māori, and probably largely not for Pacific people either. And so if we're waiting for the FDA to approve things for use in New Zealand, it's never going to happen. So you've kind of got this problem of, well, if we rely on other international jurisdictions, there are things we're never going to get approved. But if we're trying to approve everything, we're never going to approve anything because we don't have the people or the money. So interesting balancing act.
I always start those discussions from the other end, but although I totally acknowledge your point, Jan. Because there was a product that did my head and it was extremely expensive called Stop Smoking Naturally. And if you read the instruction leaflet, it said very clearly, an asterisk, this product does not imply that it stops smoking at all, naturally or otherwise. And it was actually said so. This was just its name. It could have been called Fred's Cookies, but it was called Stop Smoking Naturally, and therefore it created the sense of it had a therapeutic purpose. And then claimed immediately that it didn't have a therapeutic purpose. So good luck with that, and I hope it ends well for you. But you are now seriously out of pocket.
Yeah. So when you say you'd start at the other end, is the other end at the point that it's harming people? Is that what you're saying?
Where it's for me, it's where it's I'd be starting at, I would be personally starting at the false advertising end, where it is, where it does not have a therapeutic, benefit.
Even though it claims to.
Yeah. So if it says, look, this is a natural product, and like chocolate chip cookies, and if you think it does wonders for your health, you knock yourself dead. That's fine. You've got a clear expectation you have not having a therapeutic benefit. And the same way, it's almost like an advertising bill, the same way if your phone claims to, or your watch claims to monitor your pulse wave, then it has to monitor your pulse wave. If it doesn't monitor your pulse wave, then it's, you can put it any nice bit of wording you like, but you can't claim that it's monitoring your pulse wave, because otherwise people might rely on it to detect their AF.
There's a little bit of Commerce Commission in that, I think, isn't there? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I kind of think that's what it is, because a lot of the stuff is buyer beware. I mean, before we get too precious about it, where you look at the medications, a lot of the uses that we put them to, I mean, number needed to treat for most drugs is a bit meh. Yeah, we use them for a lot of off-license properties, and we have pseudoscience beliefs. So, before we get all precious about some of this stuff, it's like, well, not a lot of the medicines are actually that flash to start with. And I mean,
although it turns out every year paracetamol and aspirin are better than we ever thought.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think this has been
aspirin's my favorite drug, because it is the classic herbal drug. It's found in the willow bark. It's a question of, do you harvest the willow bark off the tree, or do you get your favorite chemist to run around and do some cooking? But you still end up with the aspirin molecule, and it still binds in the same place in the body and still has the same impact on the inflammatory process.
But then you might have a different effect on that.
Organic and natural. That's this whole the market view of what's organic.
Aspirin from willow bark, make millions.
Yes. Yeah.
But I mean, organic technically is just something made of carbon atoms. So
yes.
do you have a tree make it, or do you have your favorite chemist make it?
Favorite chemist. This is actually an example, a thought experiment that I was having for the sort of the innovative services being delivered in the mental health space, as well as that. I was thinking about people who cannot explain why what they do does what it does, and certain approaches will have an impact on people, but then you can't quantify the unintended consequences of that. And like eating willow bark will be great because it will reduce the inflammation, but there's probably a whole bunch of other chemicals within willow bark that, if it's not refined, then you end up having those as well. And so it's a matter of kind of having to understand why things do what they do in our space, and what also other unintended consequences there are too. And that's probably the case with a lot of medicines too, isn't it? That they have a wide range of impacts.
Yep. So.
That willow bark one would be, it's the aspirin part is like where I'd want to get to with mental health, but then it's also a bit freaky when you get there too, because you've got so much control.
Yeah, maybe there's some mushrooms been growing on the willow bark, but yeah. Since we last had a meeting, I've met three new groups that I didn't know about, which I might just quickly relay to you. So the first one is Matai. So some of you might have heard of Matai. They're based in Gisborne, and they do MRI research. They've got 3 projects they're running at the moment. So the first project is understanding concussion, so both the diagnosis and treatment of concussion, and they're combining readings from 4 sensitive mouthguards in rugby, pitch side assessments and ongoing clinical assessments, and then kind of MRI exams. One of the things they're trying to reconcile at the moment is the recovery rates within a kind of a concussion period, which is interesting. So that temporality question. So that's project number 1. Project number 2 is they are doing work in prostate cancer. So at the moment in New Zealand, what happens is you'll get depending on where the practice is happening, you get an MRI of prostate, and then someone does a blind biopsy using ultrasound. So basically the MRI, which gives you the margins that you want to sample to, isn't overlaid on the MRI. So they tested before Christmas overlaying the ultrasound on the MRI. So when they did the sampling, they got a nicely distributed model. And their clinical leader is trying to grow the amount of sampling processes they can go through so that they can prove that it's more effective to do that process and therefore less surgery than it is to kind of intervene more regularly. Because he said routinely what happens is a place you're sampling turns out to be the place you didn't, where you sample turns out to be where you isn't where you thought you were going to sample. And so therefore it leads to a bunch of questions about whether you're in the capsule, outside the capsule, inside the margins, outside the margins that you already previously planned. So they think it's going to be quite effective. The third thing they're doing is a new type of MRI pulse for, if I remember correctly, and I got shown a pile of calculus to prove it, which was great. I was the only person that was given out the medical journal article full of the calculus because I half understood what they were talking about. But essentially, there is a T1 pulse that you can do, a very short pulse, which appears to show inflammation of the brain, and they think that's related to potentially related to a diagnostic set of criteria for MS, which was quite interesting. So they're busy writing papers at the moment relating to that. Those are the 3 projects they're working on. So MS, concussion, and prostate cancer and MRIs. And they're busy building 2 new MRI machines. I felt I asked a good question when we talked, which was with MRI research, how much of it's making the magnets better and the resolution of the image better versus how much of it's interpreting the image, and kind of how far down the pathway of MRI research are we in both those fields. And they reckon they're 80 to 85% of the way there in terms of the quality of the images. So they feel like making the images sharper, better, is not, the magnet's better, so you get a better image. Probably not so much. There's not a lot of pathway to go, so 80 to 85% of the way there. They reckon in 10 to 15% of the way there in understanding what the image produces, if that makes sense. So I thought that was quite interesting in terms of kind of the future of research and radiology, was less about a better photo and more about what are you taking a photo of. And so that was quite an interesting kind of conversation, and lots of conversation about computation. And so they're busy using time on NESI, so the national supercomputer that's affiliated to the university. So I met them. That was in Gisborne. I then met Kane Kirihoma, who runs Tākia in Gisborne as well, which is like an innovation lab. So they fund their innovation lab through the Todd Foundation and through Stephen Tyndall's foundation, to try and remain independent of lots of the local kind of politics, which was interesting. And they also supplement their income with running an escape room. So they run an escape room, and they're about to do a bunch of technology for rangatahi in Gisborne, a bunch of technology-focused kind of training and or labs and or building out a space to do that. That was cool. Met them, and then also met Viewpoint. So some of you might know about Viewpoint. Innovation space for portable MRI. Yeah, so moving it around, Andrew. So rather than having to go to Gisborne for one,
there's some of the universities. Some of the universities have run looking at programs in that space. Looking at and working with partners to make MRI more portable. So yes, less about image resolution, but much more about the getting it closer to
miniaturization type stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That is definitely a path.
So the Viewpoint people are looking at building an ultrasound device for cannulation, so more reliable and faster cannulation, presumably good in older people and or people with poor access. And I kind of was asking the question, why now? Why is this a thing you could be doing now? And they said there was a product called Butterfly, which is a portable ultrasound head which plugs into an iPhone. So basically, your iPhone creates the image of the ultrasound machine, and they said you kind of got ultrasound on a chip now. So ultrasound on a chip kind of means that lots of things that you would have needed a big workstation to do can now be done like on your iPhone or on an iPad. So one of the things was obviously this cannulation tool. The other interesting one that came up, I think, just before Christmas, so we hadn't had one of these conversations, was ultrasound relating to mammograms. So I think I posted that up on the eHealth forum. So self ultrasounding to identify breast lumps is kind of that. I think, Greg, you might have commented on this. There's that discovery problem, finding benign lumps problem, and then investigating more benign lumps because of the interval period where it might have gone away in the interval. So the story where some of you might know about this, where we kind of discourage getting whole body MRIs, because if you MRI'd everyone's body in this meeting, you're probably going to find cancer in one of us, which would probably be managed by our own immune systems by the time you decided to investigate it. So it's kind of one of those things that seems like a good idea, but may or may not be. So those are 3 meetings I've done since I've been back at work. Well, since we last met and now.
Sounds like
new things
happening. Sounds like something the American health system would do, would be to MRI everybody and increase the cost considerably and reduce the outcomes of the American health system.
Totally. We'll start investigating all of the benign tumours, even if they disappear in the interim between your weekly MRI scan. There was some guy that I saw on the internet who has been doing a bunch of personalised medicine stuff, and now he feels, even though he's 48, he's got the physiological age of a 24-year-old or something. Does that sound right? I was reading about this. Some tech guy has been doing these things, which seems like a really interesting question about how you measure that. Is it telomere length? Is that how you measure biological age? Yep, good work. I seem to remember some things from university, perhaps. What else have we seen happening? What else are we working on? Oh, I know, there's stuff behind me. So we're starting to do some current state around cardiovascular disease, the cardiovascular disease pathway at the moment. So basically a high-level process map with gain points and pain points. So gain points being, opportunities we know exist, and pain points being things we know are problems with the current process. So you probably know about problems with the current process of cardiovascular risk assessment, i.e. that it probably needs 3 visits to health professionals in order to get a plan underway, which seems like pretty excessive. Because often people turn up, get a lifestyle questionnaire done, get sent away to do a blood test, and then have to come get the blood test, turn up at the blood testing place, and then come back again once you know the results of the blood test to get a care plan put in place. So that seems like an interesting opportunity. Could you send the blood test kit to someone's house and get them to tell us what the results are when they do it at home? Could you do it in the, millionaire spends 2 million. Nice. Not much of a millionaire anymore. A little bit like Elon Musk. You know what I mean? I'll buy Twitter to make myself poorer rather than actually achieve what I wanted. So we're doing a little bit of work in cardiovascular disease. Mary, how's your iCare Fast stuff going?
So for those who don't know about the iCare Faster project, what's happening is down in Canterbury ED, there's a clinical trial for a quality improvement project for a point of care device that tests blood levels for troponin T, which is the protein that lets you know if you've had kind of a heart attack and the like. So at the moment, the blood tests can take between 1 and 4 hours to get your test back. So this point of care device will have the test back in about 8 minutes, which is rather exciting. It was recently, probably at the end of last year, it was on the news. Minister Little did a bit of a plug on it, which was quite cool. Our side of the thing is to roll out the data side. So what's going to be different about this one is that we're going to host the middleware into Whātua as clouds, with the idea that by hosting it in one place, we don't have to repeat infrastructure in all the other areas. It's been interesting. Obviously, it's always a good thing to find out that every single hospital has a different way that they run their infrastructure, which, well, we kind of knew that. So it started off with Canterbury. It started off in November, and we've got a couple, we've got Whangarei and Nelson, I think, are next off the rank. So it's been a bit of a interesting working with things that sounds very similar. I mean, from a very basic point of view, you're just asking someone to install software, but it's not. So so yes, it's been a very interesting project of working out resourcing and learning about the different IT flows, especially with the labs and the likes and all the different middlewares that they're using. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be going live from our point of view by the end of this coming month, and should see some clinical results popping through. So that's going to be running. It's a fixed term of 1 year to roll out, with the intent that they've received funding from the Health Research Council to also roll out iCare Rural. So these will be point of care devices that will be sitting in the community. I don't know quite what that means yet, if that's just in GP practices or likes, or if it's going to be in ambulances, and that's to hopefully help people not needing to make that, especially in more rural areas, make that long return trip to find out that they have indigestion. Because I think we've worked out that I think 1/3 of all people that present to ED present with chest pain. So it's quite a lot of people that are taking up beds and stressing out while they find out that it may or may not be something as serious as cardiac, or it gives a chance for them to be assessed faster and pushed through to where they need to be. So
so I would argue for that way around, because one problem with this course is that sometimes it takes a few hours for the trope T's to rise.
That is true.
Certainly, if the person turns up and you've got a normal ECG and trope T's risen, you're still going to send them on their merry little way. Yeah. So, but no, I think it sounds wonderful. If you come across and I'm seriously on the hunt for something that measures HbA1c, point of care HbA1c, I'd seriously be in the market for that. One of our local bits of innovation for that is that we're finding that for some reason locally we only assessed Maoris for diabetes after their body parts fall off. That's due to diabetes. It seems a little bit, you kind of knew that because it fell off.
That's a bit back to front. Yeah.
Just a little, but that's okay, because we do measure the white folks, because that makes lots of sense. So I'd be quite keen for point of care, because then I can push point of care HbA1c out to iwi Maori providers, and then they can just, even if we do get healthcare assistant level people to just wander around, and basically if you're over 30 in Maori, we'll measure your HbA1c every time we find you. I mean, we could do it a little more scientific than that, but I mean, just I'm going back to my favourite Stalin quote: "Quantity is quality."
From a data flow perspective, Greg, the middleware that we're using can do all of that. So pick up the result off the device and push it through to a record. So yep, 100% can do that. There's a group out of the University of Canterbury, engineers, that have built a light-based glucose meter for neonates. So that's proved to be effective. It was running a trial in Christchurch Hospital. And so they've got backing from a number of iwi to invest in making an adult testing device. So they're busy making prototypes at the moment. It's funded a bit through SIFTI, so Science for Technology Innovation, which is part of the National Science Challenges. So I'm working with them a little bit on that, with the thought that that's part of it. The other part to it is obviously for insulin-dependent diabetics to be able to dose the insulin as a consequence of knowing what the HbA1c is. And so their plan is try and make the devices as cheap as possible and try and move the as much of the calculation process to the cloud as possible, or the management process of the devices to the cloud as possible. So that's kind of something that they're working on. So happy to. I'm seeing Louis tomorrow, I think.
Yep.
So they're interested in talking to. Yep, tomorrow morning. They're interested in talking to people that want to do this as well. So, hey, do you want to change your model of care around diabetes? And so they'd be interested in talking to you, I think.
Yeah, no, very much. Really appreciate being connected. Thanks.
We'll do that tomorrow morning. Very good. So another project that Eileen and I are now helping on is some of you might know about student placements. So the health system does lots of undergraduate kind of student placements, probably less in the medical space and much more in the nursing and allied health space. And we don't really have many systems for managing that. So we're running through a design process, or about to run through a design process to go, what does it look like at the moment? What does it need to look like? And then plan to get a budget allocated so that we can start to solve that problem. One of the big barriers to training more people is obviously having placements where you can train people. And so if we don't know how many placements we offer, we therefore don't know how many to add. And there's a few commercial incentives in this. So we get paid to do it for a lot of these placements, but also the universities are the ones that pay us. So there's kind of in some ways they're really incentivized to want to train more people, but they're also not necessarily incentivized to pay us, I guess, how much they owe us. So there's kind of some really interesting behaviors in this, I think, that are probably going to surface as we go forward in that. I don't know, Eileen, what you think about that. Have you got any thoughts about kind of how this is going to go? Just feels quite big and complicated to me at the moment.
Yeah, no, it is complex. I think it's decisions about what clinical discipline you run with first, or do all of them at the same time, I think is probably going to be one of the deciding factors. They seem unsure about how to progress even that piece of the work, never mind like what that looks like. It will be interesting to see how much they let universities and the people that run those undergraduate courses into that process to have their say at the table about what their capacity is as well.
Yeah, I'd say even even the students themselves, because it felt like, I was in the meeting this afternoon, and it felt like, a nice to have was finding out from the students whether the placements were any good, because it was more about booking and getting paid for the placements. And I was like,
even students being able
more bad placements is probably not a good option. Yeah,
students being able to preference where in the country they would like to be placed.
Yeah, or some sort of matching algorithm. They do that in the US for medical students. Do they do that here, Greg, for medical students?
So I was just going to say there's two issues here. One is for medicine, there's a competition for patients because there's, with the reduction in the number of beds, actually finding enough patients and teachers to teach the medical students is becoming a real challenge, which is why your Dunedin became the Christchurch and Wellington, and then Wellington's started to scatter people, Auckland starting to scatter people. So you've got quite a bit of competition for patients. We don't so my recollection of the medicine program is you can select, but if we don't get an even distribution, you are selected. But the next round of selection versus selected occurs when you're applying for your PGY1, your first role. That's another rinse and repeat of that exercise. As a generalization, it normally works out okay, but sometimes it sucks.
Yeah, I remember training as a physio, and so I trained in Otago, and we did placements out of the Dunedin school, Christchurch, and out of Wellington as well. And I think of 90 people were now trained in our year. I think there might have been 4 people that applied to come to Wellington, and I was one of them because my girlfriend was moving to Wellington at the time. And we ended up with, I want to say a third of them coming to Wellington, and everyone was dreading it. It's real funny because so many of the people that I then trained with never wanted to go back to the South Island again as a consequence of moving to Wellington, because most of them had never been to Wellington. But it was kind of one of those things that was felt, for lots of people, they felt their life was ending. and it turned out that it wasn't, obviously. But funny how that turned out to be a very different set of expectations than people were kind of, or outcomes that people were setting with their expectations. So, yeah, well, I think maybe we should call it there. Does anyone else have anything they want to have a chat about? Any other problems that they're seeing? Greg, how's it going at Te Akawhai Order? Is it good?
It's still a very that's a very sort of the slow moving stone gathering quite a bit of moss. So we're just quietly moving on. The next round of the sorting hat has just occurred. But it seems to be we're now, instead of waiting for a general placement, we're now waiting for a specific placement. So so far so good. I mean, the people are excellent to work for. The work is amazing, but the organisation's just, well, maybe I lack patience. I have been accused of that before, but it is not happening at quite the pace that I had in mind for it. But the work itself is amazing. Although my role of all I have to do is document inequity in the New Zealand health system is hardly the most challenging job in the world.
No, I'd say you'd be falling over it, wouldn't you?
It's actually that's the actual biggest challenge. How do you manage the volume of it? How do you actually tell the story when there are so many stories to tell in a data set?
Yeah, it's interesting.
ChatGPT, you just
the way to close the loop. Yeah. No. Have you seen this? Have you seen this, Greg?
I think I have.
Yeah.
I think I have.
Yeah. So for the cardiovascular disease, I've literally just pulled one metric, which is age standardized mortality, and then I forecasted it forward 50 years. And of course, because the curves are actually the same for mortality change over the last 20 years, Māori still have 2.3 times the mortality rate of non-Māori in 50 years' time. And for a lot of people, that's pretty confronting. So I'm like, should we just keep doing equity stuff for the next 50 years and make no difference?
Yeah, we need to change this. But the thing I find so challenging is when I looked at like social deprivation across all categories of social deprivation, Māori do less well. I mean, it's not just that they're sort of poor and poor people do badly. No, even poor Māori do worse than poor, and rich Māori do worse than rich. It's like, this is nonsense.
Yeah. Literally the only explanation is being Māori. Yeah. They can't get appointments. They go and get care, and they just don't get the standard package. I mean, how hard can it be when the first appointment for diabetes? I ask myself continuously. Congratulations, you've got diabetes. Here's your starter pack. Come back and see the nurse in a month's time. Next. How can you screw that up? I mean, you can make question. Yeah, well, they do. You can make a very good argument which says that does not require a medical appointment, because then, frankly, all you're doing is being given a starter pack and told to come back in a month's time. You could receive that in the mail, receive that via a chatbot, and the outcome for Māori would be better. Yeah. Well, so something that I've been meaning to have a quick look into is access, what the access to COVID test kits looks like. So we've probably got numbers on that, so as in who's ordered them and who have they been given to. And I would be really interested to see access for Māori in that context, because that's very much a very different model for the health system to give out stuff. So what we know is for My Health accounts, the thing that you use to log into the My COVID record and do all of that, access for Māori is actually really good. So close to 17%. Which is kind of Māori in the population, which is really interesting to me. So interesting kind of conversation, because you talk to some conversations talk about digital inclusion and lots of Māori aren't included, so therefore that's a problem. And other people you talk to about Māori are very tech savvy. So because the Māori population is actually quite young, because unfortunately they all die young, it turns out that lots of Māori use lots of technology. So there's a really interesting thought there that, maybe digital is a really interesting opportunity for equity gains, basically. So
again, this is not a zero-sum game. If we can then use technology to reach out to one chunk, that's sorted. Moving on to deal with the chunk you can't reach via digital, but at least you've got the digital chunk done.
Call it additive. Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
Then if you're super clever, you start saying what we're going to do is we're going to actually start empowering the younger people to help sorting out the next generation up, and rinse and repeat that model. You know, you might not need to know, you might know how to use your computer, you and your phone. You might not have diabetes, but the next, you know, if your parents might not be so good with the phone and might have diabetes, can you please help them? Type pay it forward stuff.
Yeah, totally. So it's a very interesting note to finish on. I think there's definitely opportunity there. And Greg, I'll introduce you to Louis, and you can have a bit of a chat with him about where he's at with his glucose stuff, blood glucose stuff. Other than that, thanks a lot for checking in, and we'll do this again in 2 weeks' time, and we'll talk about some other things. And Mark, you can tell us how your golf went in the interim.
Yes, I'm looking forward to continuing to join this.
Very good.
You know, if I don't turn up on Tuesdays, that I also play Tuesdays. Yeah.
It's golf 7 days a week for you, maybe.
Yeah. Very good.
Righty-ho. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you later.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.